So, if you learned a new word yesterday and then just, entirely forgot it by this morning.
Which happens to literally everyone, by the way.
Right, exactly. It happens to all of us. But your brain actually isn't failing you. It's actively trying to keep you alive.
Yeah, it's a really harsh biological reality, but also a completely fascinating one. I mean, when you really look at it,
Totally.
your brain treats that new vocabulary word the exact same way it treats, like, useless trivia.
Just a waste of
Yeah,
space.
exactly. A waste of precious metabolic energy. I mean, unless you somehow trick it into believing that the word is essential for your survival, it's just going to dump it.
Which, honestly, that completely shatters the way most of us were taught to study, right?
Oh, absolutely. It
Uh-huh.
turns the whole traditional classroom model completely upside down.
Right. So we're jumping right into the deep dive today, and our mission here is to basically crack the code of language acquisition, specifically English.
And we have an incredible lineup of material to go through today.
We really do. We've pulled together this massive stack of sources that you, the listener, actually shared with us. We're looking at linguistic guides from 51 phrases and 100 phrases.
Great everyday resources, those two.
Yeah, super practical. And then we have neuro-learning methodologies from the Speak Institute and NeuroInglés, some transcripts from instructors like Axel Morales, and even some controversial theories on subconscious programming from Potter Universo.
Yeah, it is a phenomenal cross-section of data. I mean, really, what we are doing today is bridging this massive
The
gap.
gap between theory and reality.
Exactly. Bridging the gap between theoretical linguistics, what native speakers actually say in the real world, and cognitive neurology.
Right, the actual brain science.
Which is how we force our brains to permanently retain those phrases.
Mm.
Because they are two very different disciplines.
Yeah, because, well, knowing what to say is totally useless if your mind just goes blank the second a waiter asks for your order.
Oh, the dreaded restaurant panic. We've
Yeah.
all been there.
Right. So we are going to unpack the huge real-world divide between everyday informal conversations with friends and then those highly structured formal realities like being in the boardroom or just talking to a stranger on the street.
It's a completely different rule book.
It really is. And then we are going to explore the mechanics of how to encode that information permanently using something called spaced repetition.
Which is basically a superpower once you understand it.
It really is. So let's start by destroying a myth that has, it's just plagued language learners for decades. The Speak Institute source brings this up immediately. Your brain is not a sponge.
Right. And it certainly isn't a computer hard drive either.
Yeah, we love that hard drive metaphor, don't we?
People love it. The idea that you can just, read a vocabulary list, drag, drop the English word into this little mental folder, hit save, and then...
It just sits there forever.
Exactly. It just sits there waiting for you to access it.
But anyone who has ever tried to learn a language knows that the folder is completely empty the very next day.
Completely empty. The file is corrupted.
I remember sitting in high school Spanish, just literally staring at a list. English on the left, Spanish on the right, just hoping sheer willpower would glue them together in my brain.
Yeah, just trying to force it.
Yeah.
And the reason that fails, the reason rote memorization is so incredibly inefficient, it all comes down to how the brain prioritizes data.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, when you look at a list of isolated words on a page, you aren't engaging the amygdala.
And the amygdala handles emotion, right?
Right, exactly. And you aren't engaging the motor cortex either. You're just sitting there passively. So you are relying entirely on working memory.
Which is like super short term, right?
Very short. It's designed to hold information for mere seconds, maybe minutes if you really concentrate.
Wow, so it's literally the wrong tool for the job.
Entirely the wrong tool.
Yeah.
Neurolearning, which is really the core philosophy running through a lot of our sources today, it argues that we have to mimic the biological process of how we acquired our mother tongue.
Wait, okay, I want to push back on that a little bit.
Sure, go ahead.
When I was a toddler learning English, I had zero responsibilities. Like, my only job in the world was to point at a dog and say dog.
True.
I can't mimic that as an adult. I have a job, I have stress, I don't have a parent narrating my every move. So how does mimicking a toddler actually work in real life?
Okay, that's a really fair point. But it's not about mimicking the lifestyle of a toddler.
Oh, okay.
It's about mimicking the multisensory input that a toddler experiences.
Multisensory, so like all the senses at once.
Exactly. When a child learns the word dog, they aren't just hearing a phonetic sound in a vacuum. They're usually petting the dog, right? So that's kinesthetic feedback.
Right, they feel the fur.
Yes. And they are looking at the dog, so that's visual feedback. Plus, they might be, a little scared of it barking.
Oh, which brings in the emotion, the amygdala.
Exactly. Emotional feedback. The brain is building this massive, highly interconnected web of neurons all around that one single concept.
Okay, I see. And you contrast that with staring at a black and white textbook.
And there's nothing. There's no physical movement. There's no emotion. There's no real-world context.
Wow. Okay, so it's really about the density of the experience.
Beautifully put. The density of the experience.
The Planeta Immersion source brings up a methodology that seems to directly address this. They call it the eclectic method.
Right, yeah.
But specifically, they highlight this thing called total physical response, or TPR.
TPR is such a perfect example of applied neurolearning.
How so?
Well, it links language acquisition directly to gross motor skills. It forces you to move.
So what does that actually look like for you, the listener? Am I supposed to be jumping around my living room while listening to an English podcast or something?
I mean, in a literal sense, yes. That would actually help.
Really?
Yeah. In a classroom setting, TPR starts with the instructor giving commands in the target language. So they'll say, stand up, walk to the window, pick up the red pen.
And the students just do it.
Right. The students physically execute the action. And here's the key about a key. They do it without initially being forced to speak.
Which, that seems incredibly basic, almost like Simon Says.
It does seem basic, but neurologically, it is doing super heavy lifting. By moving your body, you are actively recruiting the motor cortex to help store the linguistic data.
Okay, so you're sharing the load across different parts of the brain.
Exactly. But more importantly, and the source emphasizes this heavily, by the way, TPR drastically lowers what the famous linguist Stephen Krashen called the affective filter.
Ah, the affective filter. I've actually seen that term thrown around a lot in language circles.
A big one.
But what is the actual mechanism there? Is it just like a fancy academic term for being nervous?
It's basically the physiological result of being nervous.
Okay.
When you are stressed about speaking a new language perfectly, your brain releases cortisol, the stress hormone.
What?
And elevated cortisol levels literally impede the hippocampus. It stops your brain from consolidating short-term memory into long-term memory.
So stress literally causes amnesia for new words.
Yes. Your brain goes into a state of mild fight or flight. It is not concerned with grammar rules at that moment. It's concerned with the perceived social threat of looking foolish.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense. So TPR kind of short-circuits that.
Right, because TPR turns learning into a physical, almost game-like activity. And since you don't have to speak until you're ready, it completely removed that social threat.
So the cortisol drops.
The cortisol drops, the affective filter lowers, and boom, the brain's memory centers finally open up.
That is wild. If I'm terrified of pronouncing a word wrong in front of a native speaker, I'm literally chemically blocking my own ability to remember the word in the first place.
You're self-sabotaging on a neurochemical level.
Precisely. The stress is chemical sabotage. I love that phrasing.
You really cannot force spontaneous speech through sheer anxiety. It just doesn't work. It has to emerge naturally from a low-stress environment.
Okay, so let's say we've done it. We've lowered that filter. We are super relaxed, and our brains are ready to just absorb information.
The optimal state.
Right. But what information are we actually feeding it? Because if we want to learn like a native, we need to know what natives actually say.
Which is often very different from the textbook.
Oh, completely different. And this is where the 51 phrases and 100 phrases sources are just pure gold. They break down this massive divide between formal and informal everyday conversations.
Which I would argue is the most critical aspect of fluency.
More than grammar.
Oh, for sure. You can have mathematically perfect grammar, but if you don't understand the social context, you are going to constantly create friction with people.
That makes sense. Let's start with the casual stuff first. Conversations with friends, peers, or just people you bump into on the street.
The day-to-day interactions.
Exactly. The sources give us the classics. Things like, what's going on? How's it going? What's up? And what's new?
And what's really crucial here isn't just seeing those words on the page. It's the phonetic reality of how native speakers actually deliver them.
Right, because nobody actually walks up to a friend and says, what is going on? With perfect robotic enunciation.
Unless they are incredibly confused or very angry about something.
Exactly. Informal speech is messy.
It is. It's characterized by phonetic blending and elision.
Elision.
Yeah.
That's when you drop sounds entirely, right?
Exactly. So, how is it going becomes, how's it going? Or even, how's it going?
Yeah, it all smashes together.
Right. Or, what are you doing becomes, what you doing?
What you do? Yeah, you hear that everywhere.
And the problem is, if you are studying a textbook that demands perfect, clear pronunciation of every single syllable, you are going to be completely lost when a real native speaker asks you a question in a noisy bar.
Oh, you wouldn't understand a word.
Not a word. You have to train your ear for the blended sounds, not the isolated textbook words.
And then there's a phrase like long time no see, which I use, well, all the time. But when you actually look at it grammatically, it's a total disaster.
It's completely broken English.
It shouldn't make any sense, but it's universally understood as this really warm, enthusiastic, informal greeting.
Yeah, that's actually a calque.
A count. What is that?
It's a phrase borrowed and literally translated word for word from another language. In this case, it was likely Chinese, and it simply became deeply embedded in English colloquialism.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, it totally defies all standard grammatical rules, which is exactly why learning through context is so vital. You can't logic your way into understanding long time no see.
No, you really can't. Okay, but let's contrast that casual environment with the formal realities. Let's step out of the bar and into the boardroom.
Put on a suit.
Right. The sources outline phrases like, how do you do, pleased to meet you, and then there's this one that really caught my eye. I wish to make your acquaintance.
Ah, yes, that one.
I have to stop here. I wish to make your acquaintance. I honestly cannot imagine ever saying that to another human being.
It is very rigid.
It sounds like I'm wearing a top hat in a Victorian novel or something.
Okay.
I mean, is this source just outdated?
You know, it's a really fair criticism, and it highlights why we always have to critically analyze our sources. I wish to make your acquaintance common in everyday English? Absolutely not.
Okay, good. I was worried.
It is incredibly stiff by modern standards. However, the sources are trying to provide a full, complete spectrum of the language. And while you wouldn't use it with a coworker, English operates on levels of social distance.
Social distance. Okay, so when would I ever use that phrase without sounding totally ridiculous?
Think of highly ritualized environments, places where ultimate deference is expected and where creating social distance is actually a sign of respect.
Like meeting a royal or something.
Yeah, meeting a high-level foreign dignitary, or perhaps a formal introduction at a deeply traditional high society event.
Okay, so very rare occasion.
Extremely rare. But even pulling back from that extreme, understanding formal greetings is really a risk mitigation.
Risk mitigation? How so? What's the risk?
Well, if you approach a senior executive you've never met at a corporate conference, and you just say, "What's up?" you are assuming a level of intimacy that hasn't been earned yet.
Oh, right. You're treating them like a buddy.
Exactly. You've basically crashed right through a social boundary. Using a phrase like, "It's a pleasure to meet you," or "How do you do?" acts as social lubrication.
It sets the tone.
It signals to the other person, "I understand the hierarchy here, and I respect your position."
That makes a lot of sense.
And honestly, it's much easier to start formal and then be invited to be casual, like when they say, "Oh, please, just call me Bob," than to start casual and accidentally offend someone important.
That's such a great rule of thumb. You can always downgrade to casual, but you can't easily upgrade to formal once you've called the CEO dude.
Exactly. There's
Yeah.
no taking that back.
And it seems like the responses to these greetings follow the exact same spectrum. The sources point out that when someone asks, "How are you?" informally, we tend to give honest, slightly gritty answers.
Right, like, not bad.
Yeah. Not bad, can't complain, or same as always.
But notice how the formal responses completely strip away that personal grit.
Oh, right. You wouldn't say can't complain to the CEO.
No, you'd say, "Very well, thank you," or maybe "couldn't be better." Formal English really often prioritizes politeness over absolute emotional honesty.
It's all about keeping things smooth. Which brings us to the meat of everyday situations. The sources give us all this situational vocabulary for restaurants, public transport, asking for information.
Daily survival stuff.
Exactly. And the recurring theme I'm seeing across all these situations is the psychology of asking for things.
Yes. English, and particularly British and North American English, is deeply, deeply concerned with the concept of negative face.
Negative face? Okay, wait. Is that like having a resting grumpy face?
Huh. Not quite. In sociolinguistics, negative face is the desire of an individual not to be imposed upon, to have their personal autonomy respected.
Okay, so not wanting to be bothered.
Pretty much. When you ask someone for a favor, or even just stop them to ask for information, you are technically threatening their negative face. You are imposing on their time.
Ah, okay. So if I stop a stranger on the street and just say, "Where is the subway?" I'm demanding their attention without acknowledging their autonomy,
Exactly. It sounds blunt, almost aggressive to a native ear.
even if my tone is nice.
Yes, because the structure is a demand. This is exactly why the sources heavily emphasize all these softening phrases for formal or stranger interactions.
Right, so you don't just ask what happened.
No, you say, could you tell me what happened?
And you don't say, "Give me the menu."
Right, you say, may I have the menu, please? Or I would like to know if.
You know, it's fascinating because to a non-native speaker, adding, "Would you mind telling me?" just seems like a massive waste of breath.
It feels incredibly inefficient.
Yeah, it's all these extra words that don't actually change the core meaning of the request, but you're saying those extra words are doing massive psychological work.
They really are. They are the linguistic equivalent of a shock absorber.
A shock absorber, I like that.
They soften the impact of the request. They give the listener the illusion of a choice, even if the choice is just whether or not to give you the directions.
And this cultural shock absorber applies to disagreements too, doesn't it? Because this is something I see people struggle with all the time in professional settings.
Oh, navigating disagreements is a minefield.
Right. In an informal setting, like with your friends, if someone says a movie is great and you hated it, you just say, "No way, it was terrible," or "I don't think so."
Very direct, no problem.
But the sources explicitly warn against doing that in formal spaces.
Because a blunt refusal or disagreement in a formal setting is perceived as an attack on the speaker's competence.
It threatens their status.
Exactly. If you are in a meeting discussing a new corporate strategy and you just look at a colleague and say, you're wrong, the effective filter of everyone in that room is going to spike.
Defensiveness instantly kicks in.
Instantly, the collaboration is dead.
So how do the sources tell us to handle it instead?
With extensive softeners. You use phrases like, to be honest, or I'm afraid I have to disagree, I see your point, but, or that's an interesting perspective, however.
You're kind of cushioning the blow.
Exactly. You validate their contribution first, before introducing your dissenting opinion. It keeps the emotional temperature of the room low. It's basically diplomacy through vocabulary.
That's a great way to look at it.
Now, before we move on to how we actually memorize all of this, I want to pull out a few pure survival phrases from the sources, because these are non-negotiables for everyday life.
If you're traveling, you need these ready to go.
Right. If you're traveling, you need these anchored in your brain right now. We have the bill, please, for the restaurant. We have, is the taxi meter on, which is universally crucial to avoid getting scammed anywhere in the world.
Very important one, yes.
And could I have a receipt, please?
But notice how even those basic survival phrases employ the please or the could I structure.
Right, they still have the softeners. Yes. Even in a purely transactional setting, the politeness marker is still required to maintain that social harmony.
Exactly. Okay, so here is the massive problem we are facing. We've just discussed the nuances of informal blending, formal hierarchy, negative face, shock absorbers, survival vocabulary.
It is a literal mountain of data.
It is. And if you listening to this, just write it all down in a notebook right now. We already know what's going to happen. Your brain is going to delete it by tomorrow to save energy.
The hard drive gets wiped.
Right. So how do we actually encode this? This brings us to the Speak Institute's 3-step active context method.
I love this method. It directly targets the neurological deficits of that hard drive approach we discussed at the very beginning.
It forces the brain to build that multisensory web.
Yes, step by step.
Okay, so step 1 is capture the full scene. And the source is incredibly strict about this. You should never, ever write down a lone word.
Never. Because a lone word lacks any spatial or situational reality.
Give us an example.
Let's take the word exhausted. If you write in your notebook, exhausted equals very tired, you have basically given your brain a mathematical equation, not a memory.
Right, there's no life to it.
But if you write, after the 4-hour flight delay, I felt completely exhausted sitting on my luggage, you have given the brain a scene.
Oh, I see it. I can picture the luggage. I can feel the harsh airport lighting.
Context is the glue.
Context is the glue. I really love that. But step 2 takes it even further, and this is where I start to see the real genius of it. Step 2 is make it yours.
This is crucial.
You have to create a new 100% personal sentence using that word.
And why do you think that matters neurologically? Let me test you.
Well, because I honestly don't care about a random person at an airport. But if I write, on Mondays, I always feel exhausted and overwhelmed by the sheer volume of emails in my inbox, well, that relates to my life.
Exactly.
That's a real irritation I have every single week.
Precisely. You are basically hijacking your own existing neural networks. Your brain already has these deeply entrenched, highly active neural pathways associated with your job, your
Yeah.
Monday routine, your frustration with your boss, or your emails.
They are already there, burning bright.
Yes. So by attaching the new English phrase to that already existing network, you are letting the old, strong memories carry the weight of the new, fragile memory.
Oh, wow.
It's a parasitic memory strategy.
A parasitic memory strategy. That is such a cool, slightly creepy way to frame it. You're injecting the new word into a host memory that already thrives in your brain.
Exactly. The host keeps the parasite alive.
Which leads perfectly into step 3. Visualize and feel. The Speak Institute says you must close your eyes for 5 seconds and literally feel the emotion of the sentence you just wrote.
This is where we bring the amygdala back online.
Right.
When you visualize that mountain of Monday emails, and you allow yourself to genuinely feel that spike of stress or exhaustion in your chest, you are doing something profound to your neurology.
Wait, but my brain is smart enough to know I'm actually just sitting on my couch studying, right? I'm not actually looking at my email. Does faking an emotion like that actually work?
Surprisingly, yes. The brain is actually remarkably bad at distinguishing between a vividly imagined emotional state and a real one.
Really? Just from imagining it?
Yes. When you intentionally simulate that feeling of being overwhelmed, your brain registers a real neurochemical shift, and it tags the associated data, in this case, your new vocabulary phrase, as emotionally salient.
It says, pay attention, this matters.
Exactly. Emotion is the brain's highlighting tool. We remember what makes us feel something.
And then the Neuro-English source adds a physical layer to this whole process with a concept called neuromapping.
Yes, drawing.
They suggest drawing a physical picture of the phrase.
Translating a linguistic concept into a spatial, visual drawing.
But what if I'm a terrible artist? Like if I draw a stick figure waiter bring a square box to remember the bill, please, does it still work? Because it won't look like a real scene.
The lack of artistic ability might actually make it work better.
Wait, really? How?
Because the goal isn't to create a masterpiece. The goal is cognitive friction.
Cognitive friction. Okay, explain that.
The effort required to figure out how to represent an abstract phrase with simple shapes engages the prefrontal cortex. You have to solve a puzzle. Then, the physical act of drawing it engages the motor cortex.
Ah, like TPR.
Exactly like TPR. And if your drawing is messy or funny, it engages the emotional centers because it makes you laugh or feel frustrated. You are basically threading the needle through multiple regions of the brain all at once.
Okay, so we've built this incredible neuro anchor. We've got context, we've got personal connection, we've got emotional resonance, and we have a terrible stick figure drawing on our desk.
The very strong foundation.
The word is locked in. But is it permanent? Because the sources seem to indicate that even with all of this effort, we are still fighting a losing battle against biology.
We are fighting the forgetting curve.
The dreaded forgetting curve.
Yes. And this is the central thesis of the transcript from Axel Morales and the data we have from my English school. No matter how well you encode a memory initially, the brain's default state is decay.
It always wants to delete. Let's dive really deep into this forgetting curve, because this is the concept that honestly changed everything for me. This originated with a guy named Hermann Ebbinghaus, right?
Yes, Ebbinghaus. He was a German psychologist in the late 19th century, and he was actually the first to systematically study memory decay.
What did he do?
He ran these exhaustive, grueling experiments on himself. He would memorize lots of nonsense syllables.
Just fake words.
Exactly. Words with no meaning, no context, no emotional anchors.
Basically, the absolute worst-case scenario for learning.
The ultimate test of raw memory. And what he found was genuinely shocking. Within just 20 minutes of learning a list, he had already forgotten about 40% of the syllables.
In 20 minutes.
Yes. And within 24 hours, he'd forgotten roughly 70%.
That is depressing.
It is. The curve of memory loss drops off a cliff almost immediately after learning, and then it eventually levels out at a tiny, tiny fraction of retention.
And we actually see a live demonstration of this in the Axel Morales source. It's such a brilliant teaching moment. He's teaching a class, and right at the beginning of the lesson, he gives his students 3 completely random phrases.
Let's see, it was, the red fox jumped over the river, I am running late to work, and, excuse me, what time is it?
Right. A mix of visual, situational, and survival phrases.
And he makes them focus on it.
He does. He explains the phonetic sounds like the K in sound in fox. He has them repeated out loud, and then
Yeah.
he just ignores it.
Completely drops it.
He moves on to teaching completely different grammatical concepts for the rest of the class.
Because he is intentionally letting the memory decay. He wants to show them the curve in real time.
Exactly. And then, exactly 30 minutes later, he stops the class and asks, "Do you remember the 3 phrases?" And the students completely struggle.
They stumble over the words.
Yeah, they miss words, they mix them up. That 30-minute mark absolutely proves Ebbinghaus right. The short-term memory is already dumping the file into the trash.
So, this raises an important question. Why do we forget what we studied yesterday, and how do we intervene?
If the brain is determined to dump the file, how do we signal that the file is actually critical for survival?
We use spaced repetition systems, SRS.
Which is what my English school text outlines.
Yes. The concept is that you don't just stare at the word every single day. That's highly inefficient
It's boring.
and boring.
Yeah.
You have to interrupt the forgetting curve at the exact moment the brain is about to delete the information.
So timing is everything.
The timing is literally everything because it works on a neurochemical level. When you try to recall a word and you struggle that feeling of cognitive strain where it's right on the tip of your tongue,
Oh, I hate that feeling.
but it's good. Because when you finally pull it from the depths of your memory, your brain rewards you with a hit of dopamine.
The reward chemical.
Right. And that dopamine acts as a binding agent. It permanently strengthens the neural pathway.
So the struggle is actually creating the glue.
Exactly. If you review a word too early, when it's still super fresh in your mind, there's no strain. Therefore, no dopamine, no strengthening.
You're just wasting your time reviewing it then.
Right. But if you wait too long and completely forget it, you have to start from scratch. There's no pathway to strengthen because it's gone.
Okay, so you want to review it when it's hard to remember, but not impossible.
You review it after 30 minutes. The curve resets. And because it's been strengthened, it decays a bit slower this time.
Right.
So your next review is maybe 24 hours later, then 3 days, then a week, then a month. Eventually the curve completely flattens out and the word is transitioned into permanent long-term memory. You never have to study it again.
To make this highly actionable for you, the listener, the NeuroInglés source actually provides a fantastic 7-day challenge framework to implement this spaced repetition. It structures the cognitive load beautifully.
Let's break down that framework because the sequencing they use is very intentional.
Okay, so day 1, you focus entirely on formal and informal greetings. We covered why that's the doorway, right?
Yes.
Then day 2, you immediately shift gears to medical phrases, things like, "I have a sore throat," or "I need a doctor." But why the sudden shift to medical stuff? It seems kind of random.
Think about the amygdala again.
The emotion center.
Right. Medical emergencies represent the ultimate literal threat to survival. By introducing high-stakes, physiologically urgent vocabulary early on in the week, you are heavily engaging the survival centers of the brain. It demands attention.
Oh, wow, that makes total sense. It wakes the brain up. Then days 3 through 5, we get into the situational vocabulary, navigating the dentist, the taxi, the restaurant.
You are building out the practical, everyday ecosystem.
Right. But day 6 is where the real magic happens. Because day 6 isn't about learning new words at all. It's a review day. Specifically, the challenge says you have to redraw the neuromaps for the phrases that were the hardest for you to recall.
And this is the active intervention in the forgetting curve we just talked about. You are deliberately identifying the weakest neural links and forcing cognitive strain to strengthen them.
Pulling them back right before they disappear. And then day 7, you record an audio of yourself performing a mini dialogue using your favorite phrases from the week.
Which integrates the visual, emotional, and auditory pillars into a physical, kinesthetic output. It's the ultimate synthesis.
I love my analogy for this whole process. Spaced repetition is literally like watering a houseplant.
Okay, let's hear it.
If you buy a fern and you dump a 5-gallon bucket of water on it on the first of the month, and then you just ignore it for 29 days, what happens?
It drowns and then it dies of thirst.
Exactly. But if you give it just half a cup of water exactly when the topsoil starts to feel dry, it thrives.
Yeah.
You have to give the brain the review right when the memory soil starts to dry out.
That is a perfect metaphor because both are living, organic systems. They need rhythm.
But here's the catch. Managing those intervals, knowing exactly when the soil is dry for hundreds of different words, is basically impossible to do manually with index cards.
Unless you want to spend hours doing math every day. Which brings us to the role of technology.
Yes, let's look at tech, immersion, and subconscious programming. We definitely don't have to use physical shoeboxes full of index cards anymore.
Thank goodness.
We have software algorithms that calculate the forgetting curve for every single word individually. Apps like Anki. But the sources also suggest using everyday tools in really creative ways, like Step 2 from the Neuro English Challenge. They suggest using Google Translate.
But not just to translate text, right?
Right. They suggest using it as a pronunciation mirror.
I love this technique.
Yeah. You type in the phrase, hit the audio button, and listen to the native pronunciation. Then you use the voice-to-text feature on your phone and try to say the phrase back to it.
And this is brilliant because if the app types out what you intended to say, your pronunciation is objectively good enough for a machine to understand.
Right. But if it types out absolute gibberish, you know you need to adjust your phonetic output.
It's an amazing feedback loop. Because when you speak normally, you actually hear your own voice distorted through the bones in your skull.
Yeah, everyone hates hearing their own voice recorded.
Exactly, because you sound different to yourself than you do to the rest of the world. So by using an objective tool like speech recognition, you get immediate, unvarnished feedback.
And the source even suggests using AI like ChatGPT. You can prompt it and say, act as a grumpy waiter in a busy New York restaurant. I am going to order food, and you need to respond to my phrases.
You essentially have an interactive, infinitely patient language partner right in your pocket.
It's incredible, and interacting with AI is a great stepping stone to the shadowing technique highlighted in the Langos Academy source.
Shadowing, yes.
I've heard interpreters use this, but what exactly is it?
Shadowing is the practice of listening to a piece of native audio, so a podcast, a news clip, or an audiobook, and repeating what you hear almost instantly. You are just a fraction of a second behind the speaker.
Like an incredibly annoying echo.
Yes, exactly like an annoying echo. If someone did it to you in real life, you'd go crazy. But the neurological benefits are massive.
What's it doing?
Well, you aren't focusing heavily on the meaning of the words at first. You're focusing entirely on the prosody.
Prosody.
The rhythm, the intonation, the stress, and all those phonetic blendings we talked about earlier, like, what you doing?
Oh, so it's pure muscle memory for the mouth and throat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It bypasses the analytical brain completely and maps the motor cortex directly to the auditory input. It is the absolute fastest way to reduce a thick accent and develop a natural cadence, because you are physically training the articulatory muscles to move in the exact patterns of the target language.
That is super practical. Okay, so we've covered the conscious mind, the active techniques, the tech. Now, I want to carefully bring up something from the Potter Universo source.
Oh, yes, the subconscious material.
Right. And I say carefully because this source ventures into territory that some listeners might find deeply controversial or pseudoscientific. It focuses heavily on the subconscious mind. It talks about subliminal audio, binaural frequencies, and programming the brain for, quote, supreme intelligence.
It is definitely a huge departure from standard peer-reviewed linguistic theory.
It really is. And to be absolutely clear to everyone listening, we are not endorsing the idea that listening to a frequency while you sleep is going to magically inject English into your brain like you're plugging into the Matrix.
No, definitely not.
We are just analyzing the source material impartially. The claim in the source is that binaural frequencies can synchronize the left and right hemispheres of the brain, optimizing it for learning. What is the actual acoustic theory there, and does it hold up neurologically?
Well, the acoustic theory of a binaural beat is that if you play a tone of, say, 400 hertz in one ear and 410 hertz in the other ear, your brain attempts to reconcile that difference.
Because it's confused by the mismatched input.
Right. And in doing so, it creates an illusionary third tone, a beat of 10 hertz inside your head. 10 hertz correlates to alpha brainwaves, which are associated with very relaxed meditative states.
So it's essentially forcing the brain into a state of deep relaxation.
That is the claim, yes. Now, neurologically speaking, the empirical evidence that binaural beats fundamentally alter cognitive function or synchronize hemispheres in a way that creates genius-level intelligence. Well, it is highly contested, to say the least.
So it's mostly pseudoscience.
I would call it an exaggerated claim built on a tiny kernel of psychological truth.
Okay, explain the kernel of truth.
We have to look at what these audios are actually achieving in practice.
Ah.
Even if the frequencies themselves aren't magic, the ritual of listening to them is powerful. You have the calming ambient noise and the subliminal affirmations often layered underneath them, phrases whispering, I am capable, I learn quickly. These serve a very real purpose.
Wait, I know where you're going with this. They lower the effective filter?
Exactly. We are right back to Stephen Creation and cortisol.
What?
If a listener genuinely believes they are terrible at languages, that self-fulfilling prophecy creates anxiety. The anxiety spikes cortisol, which blocks memory consolidation.
Right, the chemical sabotage.
But if listening to a 10 hertz frequency track with positive affirmations helps that person relax, feel confident, and approach their study session with a growth mindset, their retention will dramatically improve.
Because they aren't stressed.
Yes. The mechanism isn't magical frequency synchronization. The mechanism is just the reduction of stress-induced cognitive impairment.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. The tool itself might be a placebo, but the relaxation it causes is biologically real and highly effective for learning. It's really all about removing internal friction.
Exactly.
But even with all internal friction gone, My English School source emphasizes that the ultimate test, the final piece of this entire puzzle, is social immersion.
Because language is, at its core, a tool for human connection. When you isolate it from humans, it just dies.
Engaging in group classes or real social conversations creates what the source calls social memory. How does social memory differ from me just sitting in my room doing flashcards?
It introduces unpredictability and adrenaline.
Right, you can't control what the other person's going to say.
Exactly. When you are doing flashcards, you are in a completely safe, controlled environment. When you are in a real conversation, the other person might use slang you don't know or ask a weird question you weren't prepared for. Your brain has to be incredibly agile.
It's basically the difference between heading a punching bag and sparring with a live opponent in the ring. The punching bag doesn't hit back.
That is a perfect analogy. When you successfully navigate that unpredictability, when you use a new softening phrase correctly and the waiter actually smiles, or you disagree politely in a meeting and your point is respected, the emotional validation is immense.
It feels amazing.
It does. That real-world success delivers a massive flood of dopamine that locks the vocabulary in place far more effectively than drawing a stick figure ever could.
Mm-hmm.
Social memory combines the context, the emotion, the physical output, and the unpredictable timing of the real world into one highly durable neuroanchor.
Wow. We have truly dismantled the old way of learning today. Let's do a really quick, high-level synthesis of this journey before we wrap up. We started by discarding that toxic idea that our brains are hard drives, realizing instead that neurolearning requires a living, multisensory ecosystem.
Right.
We explored the vast divide between the phonetic blending of a casual "what's up" and the careful, negative face-protecting diplomacy of formal requests and disagreements.
The whole spectrum of social interaction.
Exactly. We then operationalized that knowledge using the active context method. We learned to never, ever isolate words, but to build scenes, attach them to personal, often frustrating real-life memories, and anchor them with visualization and messy neuromaps.
Hijacking the brain's emotional centers.
And crucially, we learned how to hack our own survival biology. We confronted Ebbinghaus and the forgetting curve and realized that the brain naturally wants to delete everything. So we fight back with spaced repetition, timing our intervals, utilizing AI for feedback, shadowing native speakers for muscle memory.
And ensuring our effective filter stays low so our memory centers stay wide open.
It is a profound shift. You're going from being a passive consumer of a boring textbook to being the active architect of your own neural pathways.
It puts you completely in control.
So to you listening, what does this all mean for you right now? It means that the way you approach learning tomorrow needs to fundamentally change. Your mission isn't to stare at a list of 50 words. Your mission is to pick just 3 phrases from today's deep dive. Just 3.
Start small.
Write a deeply personal, emotionally charged sentence for each one. Close your eyes, visualize it for 5 seconds, draw a terrible picture of it, and this is the most important part, find a way to use it in a real conversation within the next 24 hours.
Initiate that first step of your spaced repetition immediately.
Okay.
Don't wait.
But before we go, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. We've spent this entire time talking about how spaced repetition fundamentally alters how our brains store language by hacking our biological survival mechanisms.
It's all biology.
We proved that when you review, information is just as important, if not more important, than what you actually review.
Timing is the master key to bypassing the brain's deletion protocols.
Exactly. So here's the question I want you to think about today. If manipulating the timing of your review can completely rewrite your linguistic capabilities, What other areas of your life could you completely transform by simply timing when you reflect on them?
Oh, that's interesting.
Think about mastering a complex new professional skill. Think about breaking a deep-seated bad habit, or even think about how you process difficult emotional events in your relationships. Are there other mental hard drives in your life that are failing simply because you haven't turned them into living, perfectly timed ecosystems? Think about it.
A truly phenomenal question to carry forward.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.